tea. Hi, welcome to episode 7 of the Sweet Sparrow Knits podcast. My name is Julie. You can find me on Ravelry, Instagram, and Periscope as Julie Rose Sews. And you can find my Etsy shop at sweetsparrowyarns.etsy.com. And we have a Ravelry group. You can find it by searching Sweet Sparrow Knits on Ravelry. And I actually just added a new thread to the Ravelry group. It is an Ask Me Anything thread. So if you have any questions about my knitting, about I gave my cat some catnip before I started recording so that hopefully he would not prance across the screen, but he just had a sneezing fit. Okay, so if you have any questions for me, feel free to post them in the Ask Me Anything thread. If they're not questions that you feel comfortable posting in that kind of a forum, then that's totally fine too. You can always either send me a Ravelry message or send me a direct message on Instagram, and I will be happy to get back to you. So, I have a lot to talk about today. I actually have a lot of show notes. I've got 1 page, 2 page, 2.5 pages of show notes. So yeah, lots to talk about today. By the way, this is my little show notes notebook. Isn't it cute? Wee! Wee! No, that sounds like a child going down the slide, not a person speaking French. Wee! There, that's better. So let's get started with works in progress. First up is my calligraphy cardigan. This is the calligraphy cardigan pattern by Hannah Fettig, Knitbot. I am knitting this out of Knit Picks City Tweed DK in the plush colorway. I believe last time that you saw it, I was in the ribbing. So I have finished the ribbing and bound off, and I am working on the first sleeve. So I'm knitting the body of this sweater on Knitter's Pride Carbons needles, but I did not have a small enough size 6 carbon needle for the sleeves, so I'm knitting the sleeves on these lovely rosewood needles. And these were actually a gift from Michelle of the Skein and Able podcast. Michelle and I became friends when she was hosting her past podcast, Skein After Skein, and she had put in one of their episodes that she had gotten these rosewood needles that just didn't really work with her hands. I do have pretty small hands, so it worked perfectly for me because these do have quite short needle tips, so they're very comfortable for me to knit with. Thank you very much, Michelle. And you will hear more about Michelle in the O for Pod's Sake segment. So I'm just continuing to move along on this cardigan. It fits super well. I'm really excited to wear it. I haven't knit a lot of sweaters like I talked about in my last episode, so I'm actually really enjoying this one a lot. And I've heard from other podcasts that the sleeves tend to be a little bit of a slog. I'm not actually finding that to be the case for me. I don't know if it's just because this is such, like the rows on the bottom, since there are no side seams on this sweater, the rows were so many stitches that it just took forever to get across a row. But right now I think I have somewhere in the range of 70 to 75 stitches right now on for the sleeve. So it feels to me like it's, my cat is sneezing. It feels to me like it's moving quite quickly because that's, you know, only what, 8 to 10 more stitches than I would do for a round on a pair of socks. So it feels to me like it's moving quite quickly. I've only really worked on the sleeves for maybe, I don't know, maybe 2.5 hours total. So I'm really pleased with how this is moving along, and I'm just using these handy little locking stitch markers to keep track of how many decreases I've done. I'm also marking it with tally marks on my pattern, but just in case I don't remember to mark after a decrease, I like to have kind of a reminder of how many I've done. My next work in progress is so close to being a finished object, but it's not yet. So these are the ridiculously long socks. I didn't actually mean to name them that, but now it's the only way that I can think of them. I didn't give them like a different cute name or anything while I was knitting on them, so they're just the ridiculously long socks. So the first sock now has its afterthought heel, which I did in Patton's Croy in the flax colorway. And I've put in the first needle for the afterthought heel on the second sock. So over the next week or so, I would really like to get all my afterthought heels done on my socks so I can have lots of completed pairs. Also, on my Ask Me Anything thread in the Ravelry group, I did get a question from the lovely Stephanie, who is Starling Bird, how I do my afterthought heels, since I do prefer to cut for them and not put in waste yarn. So I actually am going to be filming a little demonstration of how I do that, again, hopefully in the next week, since I want to get a lot of my afterthought heels done. So I think when people hear the phrase like a cut afterthought heel, I think a lot of people think of like steeking, which I definitely did when I first heard that. I was thinking that you would go in and you'd be cutting like the entire sort of area that you're putting in your afterthought heel, that you would cut across a whole row of stitches, but you do actually only cut one stitch, so it's a lot less scary than it sounds. And I'm really excited to show you guys how I do that. So that's my second work in progress. And my third work in progress, again, is quite close to being a finished object. These are my Hermione's Everyday socks out of a sock blank by Dyed in the Wool on Etsy. Here's the first sock. It's the Hermione's Everyday sock stitch pattern. I did change it to toe up because that's just how I prefer to do my socks. And my sock is finished with Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off, which in one of my earliest episodes I talked about that I had tried a different kind of stretchy bind off because I felt like sometimes my Jenny's Surprisingly Stretchy Bind Off socks flare. I think that doing the twisted rib actually really helps to control that flaring. I don't know if it just like pulls it in more tightly or what, but I really, really like how these look. And yet, even though they look nice and neat, they definitely still have plenty of stretch. There's my first one, no heel yet. And here is my second sock. I'm almost done. I have just started the twisted rib for the cuff, so I only have maybe an inch to go, and then I'll bind off, and then I will put afterthought heels in of this lovely Knit Pick Stroll in the Wonderland Heather colorway, and I think that'll be really cute with these socks. I did knit these socks pretty long. I want to be able to scrunch them down. I think that'll kind of enhance the gradient effect of the yarn, and it'll be really cozy. Today I am sipping Bigelow's spiced chai tea, and I am having it out of this adorable Knit Maine mug. And I will talk more about that in bits and pieces. But yeah, new mug. Guess where it came from? It came from Maine. Next on the needles, I have a lot of projects that I really want to cast on. First up is the Pinwheel Scrap Blanket from Mina of the Knitting Expat podcast. She just released this pattern recently. I have been talking for a while about how I've been wanting to start a Cozy Memories blanket, but for some reason I just didn't feel ready to start. I thought it was because I had my beekeeper's quilt still on the needles, and I thought that was what was holding me back and why I wasn't ready to dive into another blanket project. But I did not feel like I would necessarily love the effect that that would give, because you can't do too much color placement with it, or if you do, I think you end up having to plan it like quite a bit in advance, because you have to plan that square and then all the squares around it and then all the squares around those. It just seemed like a lot of planning for something that was supposed to be like a relaxed, fun, scrappy project. So when Mina put out her pattern, I just fell in love with it immediately. I think I like the Pinwheel Scrap Blanket for the same reason that I like Jacqueline from Brooklyn Knit Folks log cabin style Cozy Memories blanket. It feels like there's a little bit more thought behind color placement as you go, and you can pick out like 6 or 8 colors. Obviously for the pinwheel it's 8. What? Good boy. That's my cat sitting in the chair next to me. So you can plan your color schemes as you go, and it also seems like a more portable project. You don't have to carry the whole thing around with you. So I am extremely excited to start that blanket, and I think that's the perfect combination of kind of playful, scrappy, a playful, scrappy project, and a project that I feel like I know how it's more or less going to look based on how I organize the colors of each square. So really, really looking forward to casting that on. Actually, I might do that right after this podcast. I'm so bad. I have so many whips and I should really finish them, but I just want to cast on all the things. That's all I want. Also, as usual, I am recording on the weekend, so you are getting me makeup free in super cozy clothes. So, you know how it goes. You know how I roll. Another needle adjacent project is what I'm going to call the Waffles with Sprinkles socks. This is going to be a pair of socks for my mom. So I mentioned on my last podcast that I ordered a bunch of Knit Picks Felici. It seemed like a bunch at the time. Doesn't seem like a bunch compared to the amount of Felici that I ordered the second time. Whoops. Oh well, I'll use it. Anyway, so these are going to be out of Knit Picks Felici in the Sprinkles colorway. Look how cute that is. Oh, I'm so excited about it. And again, I'm going to be doing heels and toes in Wonderland Heather. I think that'll look really pretty. So that is one upcoming project. The next upcoming project I'm going to call the Waffles on the Wall socks. And these are going to be socks for my boyfriend. And I will be knitting them out of Knit Picks Felici in the Beyond the Wall colorway. And that is a Game of Thrones reference. And my boyfriend and I both happen to be very into Game of Thrones. So when I saw this color of Felici, I had to get it to knit Rob some socks. I think he will really like them, but I am going to do these in the Blueberry Waffle pattern, which I'm also going to do for the Sprinkles socks. I don't know if I actually mentioned that or if I just assumed it would be understood from the Waffles with Sprinkles name, by which I mean that I forgot to say Blueberry Waffle socks. So I'm calling these the Waffles on the Wall socks, which I really like because it cracks me up to think of all the Men of the Night's Watch sitting on the giant ice wall in the north and just enjoying some waffles. Maybe they have ice cream on them. Maybe they're Belgian waffles. Probably not, though. I feel like if you're on the wall, you're probably pretty done with cold things, and if you could have hot waffles, you would. So that's obviously super relevant. Anyway, these will be upcoming, and my last upcoming project is another pair of socks. I'm on such a sock kick, and I'll explain a little bit more about why in the O for Pod's Sake segment of the podcast, but I'm obsessed, you guys. I cannot stop knitting socks. Can't stop, won't stop. So I showed a few episodes ago this gorgeous skein of the Grand Budapest colorway from Lara of the Fawn Knits. We had done a swap, and Lara requested my Miss Honey colorway on my Magpie Sparkle base, and I requested her Grand Budapest colorway on her Raven base. Oh, it's so gorgeous. You guys have already seen this. I don't need to show you guys the yarn extensively, but it's so beautiful. So this yarn is going to become a new pattern called the Tulsi Socks. This pattern was recently released by Verena of the Wool Club, and I just love it. It actually reminds me kind of like the Collywobbles socks that were popular for a little while, which are really beautiful socks, but they're knit cuff down, which is not how I prefer to knit my socks. And I'm sure it would have been easy enough to figure it out from the toe up, but the Tulsi socks are done so beautifully, and I really like her instructions for the heels, and I love Verena's aesthetic, so I'm very excited to knit some socks that she designed. It has a beautiful slip stitch pattern on the front of the foot and then all over the cuff of the sock. And I think that will really show off all the beautiful colors in this yarn. I think it will really show the yarn to its best advantage. Ooh, we're actually breezing through this. I thought that it would take a lot longer to get through that much of my show notes, but it did not. So here we are. Next we have O for Pod's Sake. The first podcast I would like to talk about is Brooklyn Knit Folk. Jacqueline gave me just the sweetest mention on her podcast, so thank you so very much, Jacqueline. She also showed a very silly picture that I took when we were knitting in Madison Square Park last week. She was knitting on her shawl. I'm afraid I can't remember the name right now. It's by Isolde. It's beautiful. She's knitting it out of Brooklyn tweed and kind of a mustard colorway and the hayloft colorway. There we go. And just the way she had it like up around her neck made her look like a little lizard going, ah! Like, you know how when certain lizards get scared, like they have this ruff that comes up? It looked like that. Which, as it turns out, not a Komodo dragon, which is what we both thought that lizard was. No. Okay, anyway, so Jacqueline, thank you so very much for your kind words about my podcast. That meant so much. Another thank you for Candace from the Pin Feathers and Pearls podcast. Candace also said some very, very sweet things about my podcast in her latest episode, which was absolutely thrilling because Candace is someone who I think I would be good friends with if we lived closer. I could definitely see getting together with her to knit and drink tea. So thank you very much, Candace. Next, I would like to talk about Skein and Able, which is a podcast by Michelle and Jill. As I mentioned earlier, I have really enjoyed Michelle's podcasting since her previous podcast, Skein After Skein. And with her newer podcast, Skein and Able, I also really enjoyed Jill. So Michelle and Jill said some very, very sweet things about my podcast. and Jill has just received some of my yarn that she purchased from my shop, and she said some very kind words about that as well. So much appreciated. Definitely go check them out. They're hysterically funny. They're an audio podcast. Their podcasts tend to run right around an hour, maybe a little bit more, depending on the week. And they're so funny. And I really like that they have kind of a loose format. So there's a lot of talk about beauty products, tasty treats, of course, yarn and knitting, Michelle's hysterical, adorable dog, Jill's work with film conservation. So it's just a really fantastic podcast, and it feels like you're like at a knit night. That's what it feels like when you listen to their podcast. I also got a very sweet mention from Musing Runner of the Tome Time Reading and Knitting podcast on YouTube. I don't think she chooses to use her real name on the internet, which is totally fine. But this is a podcast from a lovely knitter who goes by Musing Runner and her son who goes by Dogster on the internets. And they talk about reading and knitting. Their relationship is extremely sweet and very pleasant to watch. Dogster is in middle school, and it's not just about what Musing Runner reads. It's also about what Dogster is reading, and it's really great to hear his perspective on books. When I was growing up, I volunteered and then worked as a children's librarian, so I'm pretty emotionally invested in the idea that it's really good for kids to read. Relationship is really great. You can tell that they're very close, and Dogster is very interested in his mom's knitting as well as what she's reading. And I just really like the way that she approaches sort of tough topics in whatever he's reading and whatever she's reading, really. Like she was, I've been going back and watching the series in its entirety. I started today and I'm on about episode 6. And I really like that she talks about how there's a book about like a very dystopian society after the apocalypse, but how in that particular society men and women are treated completely equally. So it's an interesting dichotomy of, you know, awful circumstances, but some good things coming out of them. And the way that she explains that is much more eloquent than the way that I just attempted to explain it. It's just a really great podcast, and she's an incredibly prolific knitter, especially of sweaters, as well as being an athlete. She is currently training for a triathlon, which I think is really cool, and very, very inspiring. I am trying to get into fitness. It is not something that I naturally am enthusiastic about. I was kind of a larger kid until I hit like 7th grade. And then I got taller and everything kind of evened out. And then all throughout high school, I was just very naturally thin. Even though, of course, you don't think at the time that you're thin. High school, Julie, why didn't you appreciate what you had? But I didn't really exercise at all. And then I got to college. My schedule changed in terms of I was not getting a lot of sleep because I went to a college that was a very intense fashion design program. So my sleep schedule changed a lot. I was suddenly getting between 4 and 6 hours of sleep on an average weeknight, which I am someone who really needs between 8 and 9 hours of sleep to feel my best. So I was ending up compensating for for the lack of energy from not sleeping enough by eating sugary foods and having a lot of caffeine just to keep myself going during the crazy hours that I was doing schoolwork. So then I got into kind of a routine of going to the gym my junior and senior year of college. But then after I graduated, I moved home and I was looking for a job for about a year before I found my first job. I had a couple things come up in my life that really made it difficult for me to do more than I absolutely had to. I kind of fell into that hole of depression, which sucked. No other way to say that. And it was at the point where I really only had the energy to do what I needed to do. About a year ago, I finally started going and getting the help that I needed to deal with the depression. And ever since, I've been kind of working my way toward becoming more active again. So I recently purchased an elliptical. And anyway, long story short, I find musing runners, discussions about fitness really, really motivating. Definitely go check out the Tome Time Reading and Knitting podcast. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. You will not regret it. In the one day that I have been watching her podcast, this has become in my top 5. Absolutely. I also wanted to say thank you again to the wonderful Jules of So Sweet Violet, who I mentioned in my last podcast because I had started watching her podcast and really, really thought it was fantastic. And she gave me the sweetest, sweetest, sweetest words on her podcast. And Jules, we are absolutely friends. And thank you so much for all of the kind things that you said about me and about my podcast and about my yarn. I feel exactly the same about you. I feel like I found a kindred spirit. So if you have not watched the So Sweet Violet podcast, definitely go check her out. She's just wonderful. And lastly, as I alluded to in my upcoming Next on the Needles segment, there is a podcast which is really inspiring me as far as sock knitting, and that is the 10,000 Stitches podcast with Andy. Andy is a physicist. She is in her mid-20s, and she knits basically exclusively socks, which boggles my mind because I love to knit socks, but I can't imagine having that be the only thing that I knit. I mean, I can't imagine knitting only one kind of thing. I really enjoy the variety, but Andy knits incredible, incredible socks. She knits cabled socks and lace socks. Right now she is doing a knit along for socks with unusual constructions. She knit the squirgle socks. I think that's what it is. She knit the squirgle socks, which have this kind of crazy construction. And then I was just looking at her Instagram, and she's working on socks that are knit kind of sideways up from the heel. She knits really incredible socks, and whenever I watch her podcast, I just want to crank out tons of socks and have incredibly cozy feet this winter. Okay, guys, acquisitions. This is going to be the longest segment of the podcast this week, I think. So my birthday was June 29th, and thank you all so very much for all of the sweet happy birthday messages that I received. It was just incredibly touching to hear from that many people who I consider friends, even though we maybe haven't met in person. It was just incredibly touching, so thank you so much. But I really used my birthday as an excuse. I bought all the things. all the things. So I mentioned on my last episode that I had ordered some Knit Picks Felici and that it had not yet arrived. It did arrive. There were a couple colorways that I was not as thrilled with as I thought I would be based on the photos on the Knit Picks website. So I decided that I would go order some other colorways. Now I actually don't feel guilty about ordering this much Felici. It only comes out like once a year, so, you know, excuses. So I will share with you all of the Felici that I bought. I bought 2 skeins of each color, but I'm only going to show you one of each color. So first, which I showed you before, this is the Sprinkles colorway, which will be socks for my mom. The Beyond the Wall colorway, which will be socks for Rob. The Eclipse colorway, which will be socks for me. The Lost Lakes colorway, which will be socks for my brother. The Sunset colorway, which will be socks for my mom. The Time Traveler colorway, which will be socks for me. I love this color. I'm really excited to have picked this up. I remember seeing this color because this is one of the only ones that they actually do run, I don't want to say continually, but they ran it a few years ago, and then I don't think they ran it this past time, and then right now they have it in stock. So I was very, very excited to get my hands on 2 skeins of this for some cozy Doctor Who socks for me. But we're not done, ladies and gentlemen. There's more. This is the Balloon Ride colorway. This is the one that I wasn't as happy with when I saw it in person as I was when I ordered it online. But it's growing on me. I think I needed to get used to the idea of how green this yellow is. This yellow right here is very green, which I don't think I was expecting. But it is growing on me. I just had to get used to it. This is the Bubble colorway, which is really adorable, and I'm very happy with it. And this is the Ever After colorway, which again I'm super happy with. So that was all the Felici that I bought. I'm gonna be set for a good long time with self-striping sock yarn. So there's that. And then the other birthday treat that I gave myself was a loop bump. I love spinning fiber from Loop. It's incredibly well prepared. Her colors are just gorgeous. So I decided that when she had an update, I was going to take a look and see if there was anything that I loved. And I loved this bump. Oh, it's so pretty. This is the Mediterranean Morning color. And it's just all my favorite colors, almost all my favorite colors put together. It's got this beautiful soft lavender, a gentle gray, a sky blue, a mint green, and an aqua. And I just love it. I think it's so beautiful. And I cannot wait to spin this up into yarn for a shawl. So that was all of the acquisitions that I purchased online. But for the 4th of July weekend, Rob and I went to a cabin in Maine, and it was incredibly wonderful. Before I start talking about what I purchased in Maine, I want to just give you kind of an idea of what the trip was like. So I made a little video. I hope you enjoy it. That was a little peek into our trip to Maine. It was absolutely wonderful. It was probably the best vacation I've ever been on. It was incredibly quiet and restful and creatively recharging. Rob and I stayed in an Airbnb. It was actually both of our first experiences with an Airbnb, and it was great. It was wonderful. The owners were incredibly pleasant, and it was just the right amount of interaction with them. It still felt very private, but we were able to ask them any questions and just enjoy talking to them about the area. It was really wonderful. So acquisitions from Maine. The first yarn store that we stopped at, you heard me right, the first yarn store, was called Quilt Divas, and it is in Rockland, Maine. We were we were driving to a lighthouse, and we saw this store that said knitting and quilting on the window, and Rob said knitting and quilting, and like turns into the parking lot, and we went. So that was pretty great. A plus for navigation into a yarn store. So we went into Quilt Divas, and they had not a huge selection of yarn, but they had something that I really liked, which was online super sock. This is actually the same yarn base that I knit my first ever pair of socks out of, and I picked up a skein in the Flower Colors line, colorway 131. So it's just these very pretty sort of pastel pinks and aquamarine blues and pale yellow. It's really pretty. I think it's going to make some very pretty socks, and it'll be nice to have such summery colors when it's cold outside. And the other thing that I purchased at Quilt Divas was some fabric. I recently started a quilt. It is my first quilt. I shouldn't even say recently, really. I started it, and then I started my dyeing business and my podcast, and it was one of the things that just kind of fell off the radar for a little while until I had some spare time. But here's one of my quilt blocks. It's a little wrinkled. Sorry about that. I am doing the Scrappy Around the World quilt, and I'm doing it in shades of purple and yellow primarily, with some gray mixed in as well. And I picked up 2 fat quarters of this adorable blueberry fabric to put in my quilt. The Airbnb that we were staying at had, the owners had planted blueberry sod all around their house, as well as the little cabin where we were staying, and there were just ripe blueberries that you could literally reach out of the hammock and pick and eat, and it was wonderful. And I really love the idea that when it's cold in the winter and we're kind of inside looking at the snow, Rob and I will be able to be under a quilt that has squares from our summer adventure in Maine. So I'm very happy about that. And I really want to get back to this. Maybe I'll do a little bit of that today after I finish recording, and after I finish casting on my pinwheel scrap blanket. I have a lot of plans. And I also got one other fat quarter of fabric while I was there. It's these cute little birds perched on mushrooms. I don't know what this will be for. I just thought it was so cute. So that is everything that I purchased at Quilt Divas. Our other stop as far as yarn shopping was Knitwit in Portland, Maine, which I really wanted to go to because they carry every color of every base of Quince & Company yarn, and that's a dream come true. I'll put in a couple of pictures of the wonderful wall of Quince. So we stopped there, and the owner was incredibly sweet, and she she mentioned to Rob that there was a coffee shop down the street. I got the feeling that she had said that to male counterparts of female knitters numerous times. So Rob went to the coffee shop and enjoyed a little quiet time there while I did some damage of the yarn shopping variety. So first of all, look at this adorable tote. Isn't that so sweet? The lovely owner of Knitwit put my purchases in that super cute tote bag. So I'm only going to show you one skein of each color that I bought, but I will tell you how many I bought. So I got, all the yarn that I bought was Quince & Company Finch. I really wanted to purchase Quince & Company in person because I don't particularly love ordering large quantities of yarn that I haven't seen in person because the color could be slightly different from monitor to monitor, which doesn't really bother me if it's like a tonal or a hand-painted yarn, but for a solid, I really want to make sure that I love the color and that it looks good with my skin tone. So this is Carrie's Yellow. I actually thought I would be purchasing the honey colorway, but when I saw it in person, I felt like it was a little bit too green and too dark for what I wanted. And then when I saw the Carrie's Yellow, I thought, oh, this is perfect. So I purchased 7 skeins of Finch in Carrie's Yellow, and this is going to become a Grace cardigan by Jane Richmond. I think it's going to be a very wearable cardigan. I can definitely see myself pairing it with all kinds of things through fall, winter, and spring. So I think it'll be really versatile. I think this color will go very nicely in my wardrobe because a lot of what I wear is gray, navy, black, blush, and ivory. That's a lot of what I wear. So I think this will be a really nice way to kind of liven up my colors in the winter. So pretty. So I got 7 skeins of this, and I also purchased 6 skeins of 2 other colorways. So I purchased 6 skeins of Petal and 6 skeins of Caspian. I originally had intended to purchase the shell colorway instead of the Petal colorway because I thought I would like something a little bit deeper, but I didn't feel like there was enough contrast between shell and Caspian, and I really wanted to use the 2 colors together. I was planning on knitting the Moose sweater by Lone Keldson. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. And that was what I purchased the yarn intending to knit. However, I went back after purchasing the pattern and I read a little bit more in the way of comments and project notes on that particular pattern, and there were several comments saying that it wasn't super clear and that it was like that the gauge was a little bit strange. It's fingering weight knit on a US size 6, which is generally my standard for like shawls. I can see where that would be actually quite a pleasant gauge for me to knit at because I am a tight knitter, and working fingering weight on a 6 for me is about equivalent to working it on a 4 for other podcasters that I've seen. It seems like in general I am about 2 needle sizes up on average. So for instance, a lot of podcasters knit their socks on size 0 needles. I knit my socks on size 2 needles. I'm talking in US sizes, but it's easy enough to figure that out for millimeters as well. But there were also comments that the sleeves are actually 3/4 length sleeves, which I thought is kind of odd. Like, why would you do a very warm Fair Isle wool sweater with 3/4 length sleeves? And the impression I get is that it's because the moose motif that's all over the sweater. It takes a little bit more math to figure out the repeats for that because it is quite a large motif. And I think I will eventually attempt it, but this yarn is really special. It was the first trip that Rob and I took as a couple. So I want to make sure that whatever I knit with this, it's something I absolutely love. And I don't want it to be a frustrating knit because it was such a wonderful trip. I want the knitting of the yarn that I purchased on that trip to be just as pleasant and breezy and relaxing. So I think what I'm going to knit instead is the Stasis Pullover by Lila Robb from the Brooklyn Tweed issue Spring Thaw. It is very beautiful. It has color work around the yoke, but the way the color work is shaped is very delicate and feminine. It goes right along the shoulder yoke, but it doesn't come all the way up to the neck. There's a bit of just solid around the neck. So I think I'm going to do the body of the sweater in the Caspian and all the color work in Petal. I think that will be beautiful, and I'm very excited to knit that. So those were my yarn purchases from Knitwit. And this is a ridiculous thing for me to have purchased. I have so many mugs that, I mean, I could have the world's largest tea party and have plenty of mugs left over. It's out of control. But they're so great. I use them for everything. And I drink tons of tea, so I always like to have a variety of mugs. So I bought this beautiful hand-thrown Knit Maine mug. And I did do a lot of knitting in Maine. I knit in the hammock. In the mornings, I would wake up around 5:30 and head up to the hammock and enjoy some time knitting, watching the tide go in or go out, because we were literally right on the ocean. So yeah, I wanted a souvenir that actually said Maine on it, as well as knowing that I purchased the yarn in Maine. So I absolutely love this. And again, I'm really looking forward to being curled up this winter, having a hot cup of tea when I get home from my walk from the train, and remembering the warm, breezy, wonderful trip that we had to Maine. And I believe that is everything that I have to talk about this week. I would love to hear from you, so feel free to get in touch with me on Ravelry, Instagram, Periscope, wherever works for you. I'm in all the places on the internet. So I'm going to enjoy a nice quiet afternoon, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.